Greyhound bus, a metallic leviathan weary from its long journey across the heartland, exhaled a final sigh of compressed air as its doors creaked open in the heart of Aero Pines. The town's very name, plastered in stylized, wing-emblazoned lettering on the depot sign, spoke volumes of its singular obsession. Here, the wind whispered tales of daredevil stunts and record-breaking speeds. The local diner served Wright Brothers breakfast specials, and the annual Founders' Day celebration invariably culminated in an air show that drew crowds from hundreds of miles around. For Jake Riley, returning to this haven of high-octane aviation after a prolonged absence felt like stepping back into a dream, albeit one now tinged with the bittersweet ache of a life irrevocably altered. He descended the bus steps with a practiced slowness, his left leg encased in a sleek carbon fiber prosthetic, making the descent smoother than his early, more cumbersome models. 5 years had passed since he'd last set foot on Aero Pines soil. 5 years spent navigating the sterile corridors of military hospitals and the demanding routines of rehabilitation centers. 5 years wrestling with the phantom ache of a limb that was no longer there. He carried his worn duffel bag, its canvas faded from countless deployments, a tangible reminder of a life lived in service, a life that now seemed a distant echo in the quiet hum of this aviation-fixated community. Aero Pines hadn't changed much, he noted, his gaze sweeping across the familiar landscape. The quaint clapboard houses with their meticulously manicured lawns, the towering pine trees that gave the town its name, the constant, low thrum of aircraft engines overhead. It was all as he remembered. Yet, something felt subtly different. A shift in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Perhaps it was the way the locals, their heads perpetually craned skyward, seemed almost oblivious to his arrival, their attention fixed on the distant glint of a Cessna soaring effortlessly through the azure canvas. He made his way towards the small, weathered taxi stand, the artificial limb clicking softly against the pavement. The air was thick with the scent of aviation fuel and freshly cut grass, a familiar aroma that usually brought a smile to his face. Today, however, it felt tinged with a sense of melancholy. He used to breathe this air with the exhilaration of a man who had danced among the clouds, who had pushed the boundaries of gravity with the skill and precision honed through years of rigorous training. Now, the same air seemed to whisper reminders of what he had lost, of the dreams that had been grounded by a single, devastating incident. The taxi driver, a portly man in a faded baseball cap adorned with a picture of a vintage biplane, barely glanced at Jake as he stowed his bag in the trunk. His attention was immediately drawn back to the sky, where a pit special was performing a series of breathtaking aerobatic maneuvers, its engine roaring like a caged beast unleashed. "That's Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds," the driver commented, his voice filled with awe. "Been practicing for the Founders' Day air show. Heard he's gonna unveil a new routine this year. Something spectacular." Jake simply nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. He remembered Jimmy Reynolds, a cocky but talented pilot from his high school days. The air show had always been the highlight of Aero Pines' calendar, a showcase of the town's aviation prowess and its deep-seated love for all things airborne. He used to be a part of that spectacle, a rising star in the local flying club, his own dreams soaring as high as the planes he piloted. Now, he was just a spectator, a grounded bird watching his former flock take flight. The drive to his childhood home was short, the familiar landmarks passing by in a blur of memory and present reality. His mother, bless her heart, greeted him with the tearful embrace he had longed for, her love an unwavering beacon in the turbulent seas of his emotions. The house was as he remembered it, filled with the comforting clutter of a life well lived, the walls adorned with photographs capturing moments of joy and laughter, snapshots of a past that now felt both intimately close and impossibly distant. For the first few days, cocooned in the familiar warmth of his mother's care, Jake found a measure of peace. But the world outside the familiar walls of his home beckoned, and with it came the subtle but persistent reminders of his altered state. The friendly but slightly awkward inquiries about his time away, the well-intentioned but often clumsy attempts to avoid mentioning his injury. They all served as gentle nudges, reminding him that he was no longer just Jake, the kid who dreamed of flying. He was Jake, the veteran, the one who had come back different, a man whose dreams had been clipped, his wings permanently grounded. But the quiet comfort of his mother's home couldn't entirely shield Jake from the subtle yet persistent reality of his altered circumstances within Aero Pines. The initial well-wishers, neighbors who offered fleeting words of welcome and inquired politely about his service, soon returned to their familiar routines, their attention drawn back to the ever-present spectacle of the skies. The buzz surrounding Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds' preparations for the Founders Day air show intensified. Conversations in the local diner and the hardware store dominated by speculation about his new routine and the possibility of record-breaking stunts. Jake found himself on the periphery of these discussions, a silent observer in a world that still revolved around flight, a world he was no longer fully a part of. His prosthetic leg, while a marvel of modern engineering, was a constant reminder of his limitations. The simple act of navigating the uneven sidewalks of Aero Pines, the gentle slope of his mother's garden, each step required a conscious effort, a calculation of weight and balance that had once been effortless. He tried to participate in the town's traditional Saturday morning meetup at the airfield, a place where locals gathered to admire vintage aircraft and share flying stories. But the experience left him feeling more isolated than connected. He watched with a pang of longing as familiar faces, older pilots he had once looked up to, now greeted him with a polite but distant acknowledgement, their attention quickly returning to the gleaming aircraft and the animated discussions about airspeed and altitude. He felt like a ghost in a world that had moved on without him, his grounded state a stark contrast to the soaring dreams that still lingered in his mind. The physical limitations extended beyond mere mobility. The subtle shifts in balance required for tasks he had once taken for granted. The phantom aches that sometimes flared without warning. The sheer exhaustion that often followed even seemingly simple activities. These were constant reminders of the toll his service had taken. He tried to help his mother with chores around the house, tasks that had once been second nature, but now required careful planning and often resulted in a frustrating dependence on her assistance. He saw the worry in her eyes, the subtle concern that shadowed her every interaction with him, and it added to his own growing sense of inadequacy. He wanted to be the strong, capable son she remembered, the one who could fix anything and always had a ready smile. But the reality was a constant struggle against a body that no longer responded as it once had. The town's upcoming Founders Day celebration, with its centerpiece air show, loomed large in the collective consciousness of Aero Pines. Banners adorned lampposts, shop windows displayed aviation-themed decorations, and the local newspaper ran daily features on the participating pilots and the history of flight in their community. For Jake, the anticipation that usually accompanied this event was replaced by a sense of dread. He knew he would be expected to attend, to partake in the festivities. But the thought of being surrounded by the sights and sounds of flight, knowing he could no longer participate in the way he once had, filled him with a deep sense of melancholy. He imagined the awkward conversations, the well-meaning but ultimately painful questions about his inability to fly, the pitying glances that would undoubtedly follow him throughout the day. He considered making an excuse, staying home to avoid the emotional turmoil. But he knew that would only further isolate him, reinforcing the perception that he was somehow less than he used to be. He was caught in a cruel paradox, wanting to reconnect with his community, but feeling increasingly like an outsider in the very place he had once belonged. the haven of Aero Pines, so deeply intertwined with the world of flight, now felt like a constant, painful reminder of his own grounded reality, a place where the very air seemed to mock his clipped wings. The subtle indifference Jake had initially perceived began to take on a sharper edge as the weeks passed. The well-meaning awkwardness faded, replaced by a more blatant disregard, and in some instances, outright mockery. Aero Pines, with its unwavering devotion to aviation, seemed to have little patience for those who could no longer partake in its aerial passions. Jake, with his prosthetic leg and his grounded status, became an increasingly visible symbol of a dream deferred. A stark reminder of the fragility of flight, a subject many in the town preferred not to dwell upon. The change in attitude was most noticeable during the preparations for the Founders' Day air show. The town buzzed with excitement, but Jake found himself excluded from the camaraderie and anticipation. Conversations about aircraft specifications, aerial maneuvers, and the skills of the participating pilots would abruptly cease when he approached, replaced by an uncomfortable silence or a quick change of subject to more mundane topics. He felt like an unwelcome intrusion, a glitch in the otherwise perfect picture of Aero Pines' airborne enthusiasm. It was at the local airfield, a place he had once considered his second home, that the casual disregard escalated into open mockery. He had gone there hoping to reconnect with some of the familiar faces, to perhaps share a cup of coffee and listen to the familiar drone of engines, even if he couldn't be the one at the controls. But the atmosphere was palpably different. Younger pilots, those who had looked up to him before his accident, now seemed to regard him with a mixture of pity and something akin to disdain. They would nod curtly in his direction, but quickly turn back to their animated discussions, their words laced with technical jargon and tales of daring feats in the sky, deliberately excluding him from their airborne brotherhood. One afternoon, as Jake was slowly making his way across the tarmac, his prosthetic leg clicking against the concrete, a group of young pilots, led by a cocky newcomer named Trent, started making pointed remarks, their voices loud enough for him to hear clearly. "Look out, here comes one-leg Riley," Trent drawled, a sneer in his voice. "Hope he doesn't trip and cause a runway hazard." His cronies laughed, their eyes flicking towards Jake with a cruel amusement. Jake tried to ignore them, to keep his head held high and continue walking towards the small airfield cafe. But their taunts followed him like a persistent shadow. "Hey, Riley," another voice called out. "Still dreaming of flying? Maybe they make special pedals for guys like you these days, if you can even reach them." The laughter erupted again, louder this time, drawing the attention of a few other people nearby who simply looked away, unwilling to intervene or offer any support. The casual cruelty of their words stung, reopening old wounds and reinforcing his feelings of inadequacy. He had once been one of them, soaring through the skies with skill and confidence, admired for his talent and daring. Now, he was an outsider, a subject of ridicule because of an injury he had sustained in service to his country. The injustice of it all gnawed at him, a bitter taste in his mouth that lingered long after he had retreated to the quiet solitude of the airfield cafe. Even the familiar smell of aviation fuel and hot coffee couldn't offer its usual comfort, tainted by the lingering echo of their cruel laughter. The haven of Aero Pines, once a symbol of his soaring ambitions, was slowly becoming a place of humiliation. Each casual encounter a fresh reminder of his fallen status in this flight-obsessed community. He was no longer seen as Jake Riley, the aspiring pilot. He was just one-leg Riley, the grounded curiosity. The upcoming Founders' Day celebration, with its highly anticipated air show, transformed Aero Pines into a veritable frenzy of aviation enthusiasm. Banners proclaiming the event adorned every lamppost. Storefronts proudly displayed model airplanes and vintage aviation memorabilia, and the local newspaper dedicated pages to interviews with participating pilots and historical retrospectives of the town's rich flying heritage. For Jake, however, The festive atmosphere served only to amplify his growing sense of isolation and the sting of being an outsider in the very community where he had once dreamed of soaring. He made a hesitant appearance at the pre-air show gathering held at the local airfield, hoping that the familiar surroundings and the shared passion for flight might offer a chance to reconnect. But his presence seemed to cast a pall over the proceedings. Conversations about daring aerial maneuvers and the latest aircraft technology seemed to falter in his vicinity, replaced by awkward silences and forced, polite smiles that felt more like pity than genuine welcome. He watched from the sidelines as the younger pilots, including Trent and his boisterous crew, engaged in animated discussions, their laughter echoing across the tarmac, their camaraderie a stark contrast to the solitary figure he cut, leaning heavily on his prosthetic, a silent spectator in a world that now seemed to belong to others. During one particularly painful moment, as a group of pilots were gathered around a gleaming vintage biplane, reminiscing about the golden age of aviation, Jake approached, hoping to share a memory of his own early flying experiences. But before he could even speak, Trent interjected loudly, his voice carrying across the group. "Well, look who decided to hobble over. Thought you'd be more comfortable watching from the ground, Hawkeye." The nickname, a bitter reminder of a youthful ambition he could no longer fulfill, hung in the air, met by a round of snickers from Trent's friends. Jake's face flushed with humiliation, and he quickly retreated. The casual cruelty of their words, a sharp reminder of his changed status. The day of the air show itself was a town-wide spectacle. Crowds gathered early, their faces turned skyward with anticipation. Jake, accompanied by his mother, made a reluctant appearance, feeling a heavy knot of dread in his stomach. As Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds took to the sky, executing breathtaking aerial maneuvers that drew gasps and cheers from the crowd, Jake found himself battling a wave of conflicting emotions. Admiration for the skill on display, mixed with a deep sense of loss for his own grounded dreams. Throughout the afternoon, as various pilots took their turn in the spotlight, showcasing their abilities and their magnificent machines, Jake became an unwitting target for Trent and his friends. They would make pointed remarks about his grounded status, their voices loud enough for those around them to hear. "Bet Hawkeye wishes he had a parachute right now," Trent quipped during a particularly daring dive. Later, as a formation of planes soared overhead, another of Trent's cronies chimed in, "Too bad Riley only gets to see the view from down here these days." Each taunt, delivered with a callous disregard for Jake's past and his present struggles, chipped away at his already fragile sense of belonging, making him feel like a spectacle of failure in the very place where he had once felt most alive. The joy and excitement of the Founders' Day Air Show, a celebration of flight that should have resonated deeply within him, instead served as a constant, painful reminder of his own clipped wings, solidifying his position as an outsider in the aviation-obsessed haven of Aero Pines. The constant barrage of subtle and not-so-subtle jabs began to wear down Jake's already frayed nerves. The vibrant energy of Aero Pines, once a source of inspiration and excitement, now felt like a suffocating reminder of everything he had lost. He found himself increasingly retreating into the quiet solitude of his mother's home, the familiar comfort of his old room offering a temporary respite from the judging eyes and the careless cruelty of the outside world. Yet, even within those familiar walls, the silence often felt deafening, amplifying the gnawing loneliness that had become his constant companion. He spent hours staring out of his window, watching the small planes take off and land at the nearby airfield, their graceful movements against the vast expanse of the sky, a poignant reminder of his own grounded reality. The familiar drone of their engines, once a comforting symphony, now echoed in his ears like a mournful lament for a life that had been irrevocably altered. He missed the feel of the controls in his hands, the rush of adrenaline as he soared through the clouds. The breathtaking views of the world spread out beneath him, like a patchwork quilt. He yearned for the camaraderie of the skies, the unspoken bond he had shared with other pilots, the feeling of belonging to a community of like-minded individuals who understood the unique thrill of flight. Memories of his flying days often surfaced unbidden, vivid snapshots of a past that now seemed both intimately close and impossibly distant. He remembered his first solo flight, the exhilarating mix of fear and exhilaration as he took to the skies alone, the small Cessna feeling like an extension of his own will. He recalled the countless hours spent practicing maneuvers, pushing himself and his aircraft to their limits, honing his skills until flying became as natural as breathing. He cherished the memories of flying in formation, the precise coordination and unwavering trust required to maintain perfect synchronicity with his wingmen. The feeling of being part of something larger than himself. He remembered the thrill of air shows past, the roar of the crowd as he executed daring stunts, the feeling of pride and accomplishment as he landed his aircraft to thunderous applause. He had been a rising star in Aero Pines' aviation community, known for his skill and daring, his nickname, Hawkeye, a testament to his sharp vision and instinctive control in the cockpit. Those memories, once a source of pride and joy, now brought a sharp pang of loss. He wondered if he would ever feel that sense of exhilaration again, if he would ever again experience the freedom and joy of flight. The thought that those days were gone forever often left him feeling like a bird with clipped wings, forever bound to the earth, watching his former flock soar effortlessly through the skies. The haven of Aero Pines, so deeply intertwined with his past dreams of flying, had become a constant, painful reminder of his current limitations. A place where his grounded reality stood in stark contrast to the airborne passions of the community. The memories of his grounded present often faded into the vibrant recollections of his soaring past. He would close his eyes in the quiet of his room and be instantly transported back to the cockpit of his F-18 Hornet. The roar of the engines, a familiar symphony. The feel of the controls, an extension of his own body. In those moments, the phantom ache in his leg would disappear, replaced by the phantom G-forces pressing him into his seat as he executed a tight turn or a daring maneuver high above the clouds. He remembered the countless hours spent in the simulator, honing his skills, pushing the boundaries of what he thought was possible. He saw himself, younger and full of an almost reckless confidence, mastering complex flight patterns, his reflexes lightning fast, his mind sharp and focused. He recalled the thrill of his first carrier landing, the precise calculations and unwavering nerve required to bring the powerful aircraft down safely onto the pitching deck of the ship. That moment, more than any other, had solidified his dream of being a fighter pilot, a dream he had pursued with unwavering dedication. And then there was Tom, Iceman Miller. Their partnership in the air had been legendary within their squadron. Where Jake was the impulsive daredevil, relying on instinct and lightning-fast reflexes, Tom was the cool and collected strategist, his every move calculated with precision. They were two sides of the same coin, their contrasting styles perfectly complementing each other. They had flown countless missions together, their unspoken communication in the cockpit a testament to their deep trust and understanding. They had each other's backs, always, pushing each other to be better, their rivalry in training only serving to sharpen their skills. Jake remembered one particular mission over hostile territory. Their flight had been ambushed, enemy fighters appearing out of nowhere, missiles streaking through the sky. It had been chaos, a whirlwind of adrenaline and split-second decisions. In the midst of the dogfight, Jake's aircraft had taken a hit, his controls momentarily unresponsive. It was Tom, with his cool head and strategic brilliance, who had guided Jake through the emergency, talking him through the procedures, keeping the enemy fighters at bay until Jake regained control. That day, Tom hadn't just saved his life. He had reinforced the unbreakable bond between them. He recalled the hours spent debriefing after missions, analyzing every move, every decision, always striving to learn and improve. They would dissect their flights with the meticulousness of surgeons, pushing each other to identify any weaknesses and refine their tactics. Their shared passion for flying, their dedication to their craft, had forged a bond that went far beyond mere friendship. They were brothers in the truest sense of the word, bound by the shared experiences of danger and the unwavering commitment to their mission. In his memories, Jake could still hear Tom's voice in his headset, calm and reassuring amidst the chaos of battle. He could still feel the camaraderie, the sense of being part of something important, something bigger than himself. Those memories were a stark contrast to the isolation and indifference he felt in Aero Pines. In the cockpit with Tom, he had been Hawkeye, the skilled and respected fighter pilot. Here in his hometown, he was just Jake, the disabled veteran, a shadow of his former self. The longing for those days, for that sense of purpose and belonging, was a constant ache in his heart, a poignant reminder of the life he had left behind in the skies. The weight of his present circumstances, juxtaposed with the vivid clarity of his past as a fighter pilot, became an unbearable burden for Jake. He longed for connection, for someone who truly understood the man he used to be, the man he still was inside, despite the limitations of his physical form. The image of Tom "Iceman" Miller, his steadfast wingman and trusted confidant, kept resurfacing in his thoughts. They had shared so much, their bond forged in the intense heat of combat and the unwavering loyalty of brotherhood. If anyone could understand the frustration and disappointment Jake was feeling, it would be Tom. He remembered Tom's contact information was buried somewhere in the digital clutter of an old laptop, a relic from his pre-deployment days. After a painstaking search through dusty boxes in the attic, he finally located the worn machine. The battery was long dead, and it took some searching online to find a compatible charger. The old laptop whirred to life with a groan, the outdated operating system struggling to boot up. Navigating the labyrinthine files felt like an archaeological dig, each click of the mouse unearthing fragments of a life that felt both familiar and strangely alien. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he located Tom's last known email address. He hesitated for a long moment, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. What would he say? How could he possibly convey the depth of his current despair to someone who was likely living a completely different life, still soaring through the skies while he remained grounded? He decided to keep it simple, to reach out as Jake, the veteran struggling to find his place back home, without immediately revealing the full extent of his past as Hawkeye Riley. He typed out a tentative email, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He spoke of his return to Aero Pines, the town's obsession with aviation, and the subtle but persistent feeling of being an outsider due to his injury. He mentioned the upcoming Founders Day air show and the bittersweet emotions it evoked. He didn't delve into the specific instances of ridicule or the depth of his disappointment, wanting to gauge Tom's reaction first. He simply ended the email with a brief mention of hoping to reconnect and catch up, leaving his phone number and a hopeful closing. Sending the email felt like releasing a message in a bottle into a vast ocean. He had no idea if Tom still used that email address, or if he would even remember him after all these years. The waiting was agonizing, each day filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He found himself checking his inbox countless times, his heart sinking with each refresh that yielded no response. Doubt began to creep in, whispering insidious suggestions that Tom had moved on, that their bond had faded with time and distance. Just as he was beginning to lose hope, a notification popped up on his phone. A new email. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The sender, Tom Miller. A wave of relief washed over him, so profound it almost brought him to tears. Tom had replied, His message was brief but warm, filled with the familiar easygoing tone Jake remembered so well. Tom expressed his surprise and pleasure at hearing from Jake, acknowledging the challenges of returning to civilian life after service. He readily agreed to connect, providing his current phone number and suggesting they talk soon. A genuine smile, the first in what felt like weeks, spread across Jake's face. He wasn't forgotten. He had reached his wingman. The sound of his phone ringing cut through the quiet of the afternoon. Jake glanced at the caller ID. It was Tom. A nervous excitement bubbled within him as he answered. "Jake? Is that really you, buddy?" Tom's voice boomed through the receiver, instantly recognizable after all these years. There was a warmth and genuine enthusiasm in his tone that immediately put Jake at ease. "Hey, Iceman," Jake replied, a smile spreading across his face. Hearing Tom's familiar voice was like a breath of fresh air, a welcome reminder of a time when life felt simpler, when they were invincible in the skies. They spent the next hour catching up, the conversation flowing easily between them as if no time had passed at all. Tom recounted tales of his recent deployments, his voice filled with the familiar mix of bravado and weariness that Jake remembered so well. Jake, in turn, shared his experiences of returning to Aero Pines, carefully navigating the topic of his injury without dwelling on the specifics of his flying past. He spoke of the town's unwavering obsession with aviation, the upcoming Founders Day air show, and the subtle sense of being an outsider in his own community. He hinted at the challenges of adapting to civilian life with a disability, the limitations it imposed on his ability to participate in the activities he once loved. Tom listened intently, his usual light-hearted tone occasionally shifting to one of concern as Jake spoke. He asked insightful questions, showing a genuine interest in Jake's well-being. When Jake mentioned the air show and his feelings of being disconnected from the town's aviation fervor, Tom's voice took on a thoughtful quality. "So, they're all still gung-ho about flying down there, huh?" Tom chuckled softly. "Remember that time we almost took out Old Man Henderson's prize-winning weather vane during the Founders Day show?" Jake laughed, the memory vivid in his mind. "How could I forget? Davies nearly grounded us for a month after that." The shared laughter created a comfortable space for Jake to broach the more difficult aspects of his return. He carefully alluded to the subtle ways in which he felt marginalized, the pitying glances and the unspoken assumptions about his capabilities. He didn't explicitly mention the mockery he had endured, wanting to see how Tom would respond to the general situation first. Tom was silent for a moment after Jake finished speaking. Then, his voice, when it came, was filled with a quiet understanding. "Sounds like they've forgotten who Jake Riley really is," Tom said, his tone firm. "Don't worry, buddy. I've got an idea. You just sit tight and leave it to Iceman." Jake frowned, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension swirling within him. "What do you mean, Tom?" "Let's just say I might have a way to remind Aero Pines what real flying looks like," Tom replied, a hint of his old mischievousness creeping back into his voice. "And maybe, just maybe, it'll help them see you in a different light too. Just trust me on this one, Hawkeye." Jake hesitated for a moment, the old call sign, a relic from their flying days, sending a familiar thrill down his spine. He hadn't heard anyone call him that in years. "All right, Iceman," Jake said, a sense of anticipation building within him. "I'm trusting you." He had no idea what Tom had in mind, but knowing his old wingman was on his side, ready to help in his own unique way, filled Jake with a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, his return to Aero Pines wouldn't be the isolating disappointment he had feared. A few days after his conversation with Tom, Jake noticed a subtle shift in the usual rhythm of Aero Pines. The familiar pattern of civilian aircraft taking off and landing at the local airfield was punctuated by the occasional, unexpected appearance of military aircraft. A sleek, gray fighter jet would streak across the sky at high altitude, its thunderous roar briefly interrupting the town's otherwise peaceful hum. There were no official announcements or explanations for these sightings, and the townsfolk, initially curious, soon began to speculate. Conversations in the diner shifted from Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds air show preparations to hushed discussions about the mysterious military jets. Theories abounded, ranging from routine training exercises at a distant base to secret government projects being conducted in the area. Jake, observing these discussions from his usual quiet corner, felt a flicker of recognition, a sense that Tom's plan might be unfolding. He kept his own counsel, offering no insight or speculation, allowing the mystery to simmer within the community. The next unusual event occurred during one of Jimmy Reynolds' practice sessions for the Founders Day Air Show. Jimmy, known for his daring low-altitude maneuvers, was preparing for a particularly complex sequence when a military transport plane, a C-130 Hercules, unexpectedly appeared on the horizon. The large, lumbering aircraft flew low and slow over the airfield, its sheer size and unexpected presence momentarily distracting Jimmy and the small crowd of onlookers. The transport plane didn't land, simply continuing on its way after circling the airfield once, leaving a trail of bewildered faces in its wake. This incident sparked even more speculation among the residents of Aero Pines. The appearance of the military transport plane seemed random and out of place, adding another layer to the growing mystery surrounding the unusual aerial activity. Jake overheard Trent and his friends discussing it at the airfield, their usual cocky demeanor replaced by a sense of genuine confusion. "What was that all about?" Trent muttered, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like that around here before." His friends echoed his bewilderment, their theories ranging from a navigational error to some sort of military VIP visit. The subtle disruptions continued throughout the week leading up to the Founders Day celebration. A pair of attack helicopters flew low over the town one evening, their distinctive whirring blades causing a brief but noticeable stir. Another afternoon, a distant sonic boom rattled windows, leaving residents momentarily startled and further fueling the rumors of unexplained military activity. Each event was brief, unexpected, and seemingly random. Yet they all contributed to a growing sense of intrigue and a subtle unease within Aero Pines. Jake, observing these events from his quiet vantage point, couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. He hadn't heard from Tom directly since their initial phone call, but he recognized the subtle hallmarks of his wingman style. A touch of theatricality, a hint of playful disruption, and an underlying precision that hinted at a larger, more elaborate plan. The town of Aero Pines, so focused on the familiar spectacle of civilian aviation, was beginning to experience a different kind of aerial presence. A subtle reminder of the power and capabilities that lay beyond their everyday experience. And Jake, the grounded observer, couldn't help but wonder what Tom's ultimate plan entailed, and how it would eventually impact the way Aero Pines perceived him. The week leading up to Founders Day saw a further escalation in the enigmatic aerial displays over Aero Pines. The brief glimpses of military jets and helicopters were replaced by more sustained and intricate maneuvers, performed with a level of skill that went beyond routine training exercises. One afternoon, a lone fighter jet executed a series of breathtaking aerobatic stunts directly above the town, its movements precise and graceful, leaving shimmering contrails against the clear blue sky. The sequence included maneuvers that were rarely seen outside of professional air shows, captivating the attention of everyone in Aero Pines. Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds, who had been diligently practicing his own air show routine, even paused mid-flight to watch the display, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an expression of awe and perhaps a hint of professional curiosity. Later that day, at the airfield, Jake overheard Jimmy and his crew discussing the mysterious pilot. "That guy's got some serious skills," Jimmy admitted, shaking his head in admiration. "Those weren't just basic maneuvers. That was top-tier stuff. Wonder who he is and what he's flying. His crew echoed his sentiments, speculating about the pilot's identity and the type of aircraft. The precision and complexity of the aerial displays became a major topic of conversation throughout Aero Pines. Locals gathered in the town square, their necks craned skyward, trying to catch another glimpse of the mysterious aircraft. Theories about the pilot's identity became increasingly elaborate. Some suggesting it was a test pilot from a secret research facility, others whispering about a legendary, unnamed aviator who occasionally graced their skies. No one seemed to connect these extraordinary feats of aviation with the quiet, unassuming veteran who had recently returned to their town, the man they often overlooked or treated with a dismissive pity. Tom, it seemed, was subtly raising the stakes, painting an aerial canvas with strokes of breathtaking skill, hinting at a level of expertise that was far beyond the capabilities of ordinary pilots. The maneuvers were not just about speed and noise. They showcased an intimate understanding of aerodynamics, a mastery of flight controls, and an almost artistic flair in the way the aircraft danced through the sky. It was a performance designed to intrigue and impress, to subtly remind the aviation-obsessed residents of Aero Pines of the pinnacle of aerial prowess. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a lone aircraft appeared, its silhouette unlike any they had seen before. It was a vintage F-4U Corsair, a powerful and iconic fighter plane from World War II, its distinctive gull wings immediately recognizable to aviation enthusiasts. The Corsair flew low over the town, its powerful engine rumbling like a distant thunder, before executing a perfect victory roll directly over the airfield. A classic maneuver that spoke of a rich history and a deep respect for aviation tradition. The sight of the vintage warbird, flown with such skill and precision, left the residents of Aero Pines in a state of captivated wonder. It was a performance that transcended mere aerial acrobatics. It felt like a message from the past, a reminder of the golden age of flight and the legendary pilots who had once ruled the skies. The mystery surrounding the identity of this phantom pilot, capable of commanding both modern jets and historical warbirds with such apparent ease, only deepened the enigma that had settled over Aero Pines, subtly preparing the stage for a revelation that the town was far from expecting. The day of the Founders' Day air show dawned bright and clear, the sky a pristine canvas promising perfect flying conditions. The atmosphere in Aero Pines was electric, the usual excitement amplified by the week's worth of mysterious aerial displays. The crowds began to gather early, staking out their spots along the airfield fence, their anticipation palpable. Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds was the main attraction, his new routine eagerly awaited. But the whispers about the phantom pilot and their incredible skills still lingered in the air, adding an extra layer of intrigue to the day's events. Jake, accompanied by his mother, made his way to a reserved viewing area near the announcer's booth. He felt a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation. He hadn't heard from Tom directly, but he had a strong feeling that today was the day his friend's plan would culminate. He watched as Jimmy Reynolds took to the sky, his performance impressive as always, a dazzling display of aerobatic skill. The crowd roared its approval, their attention momentarily diverted from the underlying mystery that still hung over Aero Pines. Then, as Jimmy completed his final maneuver and began his descent, the announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers, drawing everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest joining us today, a true aviation legend who has graced the skies above our nation for many years. Please welcome Lieutenant Colonel, retired, Jake Hawkeye Riley. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Heads turned, eyes scanning the viewing area, searching for the name they had just heard. Jake felt a wave of disbelief wash over him, quickly followed by a surge of nervous excitement. He looked at his mother, who smiled at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and a knowing amusement. The announcer continued, his voice filled with reverence. For those of you who may not know, before his recent return to Aero Pines, Lieutenant Colonel Riley was one of the most decorated fighter pilots in the United States Air Force, a recipient of numerous awards for his bravery and skill, and a former member of the elite Top Gun program. His call sign, Hawkeye, was earned through his legendary precision and unparalleled vision in the cockpit. As the announcer spoke, a large screen next to the stage flickered to life, displaying photographs of a younger Jake in his flight suit, beaming with confidence, standing beside fighter jets, even shaking hands with dignitaries. The images were undeniable proof of the incredible life he had lived before his injury, a life that had remained a secret to the town of Aero Pines. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Trent and his friends, who had been so quick to mock Jake's grounded status, stood frozen, their faces pale with shock and embarrassment. The whispers that had followed Jake since his return suddenly ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. The announcer concluded, his voice filled with emotion. Lieutenant Colonel Riley may no longer be able to take to the skies himself, but his legacy as one of the greatest pilots this town has ever produced will forever be etched in the history of Aero Pines. We are honored to have him back home with us today. As the announcer finished speaking, a lone vintage F4U Corsair, its distinctive gull wings gleaming in the sun, roared overhead, performing a perfect victory roll directly above Jake's position. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers now directed at the quiet veteran in the viewing area, their newfound respect evident in their eyes. The mystery of the Phantom pilot was solved, and the truth of Jake Hawkeye Riley's past had finally been revealed to the astonished residents of Aero Pines. The aftermath of the announcer's revelation was like a wave crashing over Aero Pines, leaving behind a landscape of stunned silence and wide-eyed disbelief. The name Hawkeye Riley resonated deeply within the town's aviation history, a whispered legend of a young pilot who had possessed an almost supernatural talent in the skies. Stories of his daring feats during air shows past, his uncanny precision in flight competitions, and the hushed accounts of his near-mythical skills had been passed down through generations of Aero Pines residents. Yet, the quiet, unassuming veteran who had returned to their midst, walking with a noticeable limp and keeping to himself, bore little resemblance to the youthful daredevil of those legendary tales. For Trent and his friends, the revelation was particularly jarring. The casual cruelty with which they had mocked Jake's disability now hung heavy in the air, replaced by a gnawing sense of shame and a dawning realization of the enormity of their misjudgment. The man they had so readily dismissed as One-Leg Riley was in fact a decorated war hero and a pilot whose skills were the stuff of local legend. The color drained from Trent's face as he stared at the images on the screen. The confident young pilot in the photographs, a stark contrast to the quiet, reserved man he had so carelessly tormented. The snickers and taunts that had so easily escaped his lips in the past now felt like a lead weight in his throat. His friends, equally stunned, avoided his gaze, a shared sense of guilt settling over their group. Throughout the crowd, murmurs of astonishment rippled through the spectators. People who had barely acknowledged Jake's presence since his return now looked at him with newfound respect and a dawning understanding of the burden he had been carrying in silence. The pitying glances were replaced by expressions of remorse, a collective acknowledgement of their oversight in judging a book by its cover. The aviation enthusiasts in the crowd, the older pilots who remembered the early days of Hawkeye Riley's soaring career, exchanged knowing glances, a sense of belated recognition filling their eyes. They remembered the raw talent, the almost preternatural ability Jake had displayed in his youth, and they felt a pang of regret for not having recognized him sooner. Even Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds, who had been the star of the air show moments before the announcement, watched Jake with a newfound respect. He had heard the legends of Hawkeye Riley, the almost mythical figure who had once dominated the local skies. To realize that this quiet, unassuming man in the viewing area was that very legend was a humbling experience. A stark reminder that true talent and heroism often reside in the most unexpected places. Jake, for his part, tried to remain composed amidst the sudden shift in atmosphere. The weight of his carefully guarded secret being revealed to the town was both liberating and unnerving. He saw the shock and remorse on the faces of those who had once scorned him, and a small part of him felt a flicker of satisfaction. But the years of enduring their casual cruelty had left a deeper mark, a weariness that even this public revelation couldn't entirely erase. He simply offered a small, almost imperceptible nod to the crowd, a silent acknowledgement of their newfound understanding. The haven of Aero Pines, once a place of quiet suffering, had suddenly become a stage for a long overdue revelation, a moment of collective realization that the quiet man among them was a hero whose story they had only just begun to understand. The revelation of Jake's true identity as the legendary Hawkeye Riley hung heavy in the air above Aero Pines, the initial shock slowly giving way to a mixture of awe and a dawning sense of collective remorse. The townsfolk, especially those who had been quick to judge and mock the quiet veteran, now regarded him with a newfound respect, their previous disdain replaced by a humbling realization of their own ignorance. The atmosphere surrounding Jake had shifted dramatically, the subtle ostracization replaced by tentative smiles and well-intentioned attempts at acknowledging his past heroism. Tom "Iceman" Miller, who had orchestrated this carefully planned revelation from afar, wasn't finished with his efforts to ensure Jake's proper recognition in his hometown. Now that Jake's identity was public knowledge, Tom decided it was time for a more overt demonstration of his friend's exceptional piloting skills, a reminder to Aero Pines of the talent they had so readily overlooked. A few days after the Founders Day air show, the skies above Aero Pines once again became a stage for the extraordinary. This time, however, there was no mystery surrounding the aircraft or the pilot. A sleek F-18 Super Hornet, its tail emblazoned with the markings of Tom's active duty squadron, appeared on the horizon, its powerful engines announcing its arrival with an unmistakable roar. The aircraft executed a series of breathtaking low-altitude flybys directly over the town, the pilot showcasing the kind of precision and skill that only the most elite aviators possessed. The townsfolk, now fully aware of Jake's past, understood the message immediately. This wasn't just a random military aircraft. This was a tribute, a salute from one exceptional pilot to another. They watched in awe as the Hornet performed maneuvers that seemed to defy gravity, its movements a powerful reminder of the skill that had once resided within the quiet man among them. The flybys weren't just a spectacle. They were carefully choreographed to coincide with specific locations and events within Aero Pines. The Hornet roared low over the airfield during a gathering of the local flying club, its presence a potent reminder of Jake's absence from the skies, a silent challenge to those who had dismissed his grounded state. It executed a perfect barrel roll directly over Trent's house, a subtle but unmistakable message to the young bully and his crew. It even performed a graceful wing wave over Jake's home, a personal salute from Tom to his old wingman. These overt displays of aerial mastery left an indelible mark on the residents of Aero Pines. They served as a powerful reminder of Jake's extraordinary past and the exceptional talent that still resided within him, despite his physical limitations. The flybys were Tom's way of amplifying the message of Jake's true identity, ensuring that the town wouldn't soon forget the hero in their midst. The whispers in Aero Pines now spoke not of pity or ridicule, but of awe and respect for Lieutenant Colonel Jake Hawkeye Riley, the legendary pilot who had returned home, and the loyal friend who had taken to the skies to remind them all of his extraordinary legacy. The series of dramatic flybys orchestrated by Tom served as a powerful, albeit indirect, form of retribution for the torment Jake had endured. The town of Aero Pines, now fully aware of the legendary pilot in their midst, turned its collective gaze towards those who had so carelessly mocked him. The stark contrast between Jake's distinguished past and the petty cruelty he had faced ignited a wave of public disapproval towards Trent and his crew. The whispers in Aero Pines took on a new tone, no longer filled with pity for Jake, but with disdain for those who had failed to recognize his worth. Trent and his friends found themselves on the receiving end of pointed remarks and icy glares from their fellow townsfolk. The casual arrogance they had once displayed was now met with open hostility, their social standing within the close-knit community taking a significant hit. The repercussions extended beyond mere social ostracization. Trent, who worked part-time at his father's auto repair shop, found himself facing a noticeable decline in business. Word had spread of his disrespectful treatment of a local hero, and many residents, their newfound respect for Jake outweighing their loyalty to Trent's family, decided to take their business elsewhere. The once booming repair shop now stood eerily quiet, a tangible consequence of Trent's past actions. Billy, the pizza delivery driver, also faced his share of public scrutiny. Stories of his mocking imitation of Jake's walk and his callous remarks about his prosthetic leg circulated widely. Customers, hearing of his behavior, began to request other delivery drivers and tips, which had once supplemented his meager wages, dwindled to almost nothing. The late-night drag races, once a source of pride and camaraderie for Billy and his friends, became awkward affairs, the once enthusiastic participants now casting judgmental glances in his direction. The other members of Trent's group, while perhaps less vocal in their torment of Jake, also felt the shift in the town's atmosphere. They found themselves excluded from social gatherings and met with a palpable coolness from people who had previously considered them friends. The realization dawned upon them that their thoughtless actions had not only hurt Jake, but had also damaged their own standing within the community they so desperately sought to impress. The overt displays of aerial prowess orchestrated by Tom served as a constant reminder of Jake's exceptional skills, subtly underscoring the foolishness of those who had judged him based on his physical limitations. The sight of the F-18 performing breathtaking maneuvers overhead became a symbolic representation of Jake's inner strength and the enduring legacy of his talent, a stark contrast to the petty negativity he had faced upon his return. The haven of Aero Pines, spurred by the revelation of their local hero's identity and Tom's dramatic reminders of his abilities, began to subtly turn its back on those who had so readily cast him aside. The bullies, once confident in their social dominance, now found themselves facing the consequences of their actions, paying a price for their ignorance and lack of compassion. The dramatic events surrounding the Founders Day Air Show and the subsequent flybys orchestrated by Tom served as a turning point for Jake's return to Aero Pines. The revelation of his past as the legendary Hawkeye Riley, coupled with the public display of his friend's aerial mastery, had irrevocably altered the town's perception of him. The pity and subtle ostracization that had marked his initial homecoming were replaced by a palpable sense of respect, bordering on awe. People who had once looked past him now approached him with hesitant admiration, eager to hear snippets of his storied past. Trent and his group, bearing the weight of the town's disapproval and the sting of their own public embarrassment, kept a wide berth around Jake. The casual taunts and cruel jokes ceased, replaced by sheepish nods and averted gazes. The social hierarchy in their small circle had subtly shifted, their once unchallenged dominance now overshadowed by the quiet presence of the decorated veteran they had so readily dismissed. For Jake, the change in atmosphere was a welcome relief. The constant weight of feeling like an outsider began to lift, replaced by a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since before his injury. The well-intentioned but often clumsy attempts at conversation from his neighbors no longer felt like pity, but genuine attempts at connection. He found himself engaging more, sharing anecdotes from his flying days, his voice gaining strength and confidence with each passing day. The local aviation community, in particular, embraced Jake with open arms. The older pilots, those who remembered his early talent, welcomed him back into their fold, eager to hear his stories and learn from his vast experience. Jimmy the Rocket Reynolds, humbled by the revelation of Jake's legendary status, approached him with genuine respect, seeking his advice and mentorship. Jake found a new purpose in sharing his knowledge, spending hours at the airfield, recounting tales of daring missions and intricate maneuvers. His passion for flight rekindled, even though he could no longer physically take to the skies in the same way. Inspired by Tom's dramatic intervention, Jake began to explore ways in which he could contribute to Aero Pines' vibrant aviation scene despite his physical limitations. He volunteered at the local aviation museum, sharing his first-hand experiences and insights with visitors, inspiring a new generation of aspiring pilots. He even started working with the local flying club, offering ground instruction and simulator training, his expertise proving invaluable to the younger members. The haven of Aero Pines, initially a source of disappointment and isolation, had finally begun to live up to its name. Jake, once a grounded hero struggling to find his place, had found a new sense of belonging and purpose within the community he had served. The scars of his past remained, a visible reminder of his sacrifice, but they no longer defined him in the eyes of the town. He was Jake Hawkeye Riley, a legend not just for his past exploits in the sky, but for his resilience, his quiet strength, and his enduring passion for flight. The fury that had briefly flickered within him had subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of peace and a newfound appreciation for the enduring power of friendship, loyalty, and the unexpected ways in which a community can finally recognize and embrace its heroes.